My name is Cora Halstead, and on a Tuesday in October, a man in a clean gray hat bought 60 years of my family for the price of a good milk cow. He did it in the open, on the courthouse steps, with a gavel coming down like a stone dropped on a table. I did not weep. I stood in the dust and counted the coins in his palm. $51.80. That was the sum of us, they said. That was what the whole place came to. His name was Roland Vane, and he told 40-odd neighbors, "Sentiment doesn't pay the county, ma'am. The dirt doesn't know whose name is on it." 2 wounds in one breath. The sale, and then the paper pressed into my hand. 21 days to quit the ground my husband broke with a walking plow. That night, I took down a tobacco tin I hadn't opened since we buried Jonah. I read one line on a government receipt. One line that Mr. Vane and the assessor and the whole county had forgotten to read. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before I go on, do this small thing for me. Subscribe so the next person the county tries to run off their land finds this. And tell me in the comments the name of the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me tell it the way it happened. I am telling you this a year on, so you'll hear no shaking in my voice. But go back with me. Go back to the beginning, before the hat, before the steps. The ground sits in the short grass country of western Kansas, Osgood County. A town called Verland, which is not much of a town, a grain elevator, a bank, a drugstore with a marble counter, and a courthouse with 2 flags. The land around it is flat and pale and honest. It does not pretend to be anything green. Jonah filed on the first quarter in 1913. He was young then, and so was I, and we came out in a wagon with a cook stove and a crate of hens, and not much else. He filed under the homestead law, the way a poor man could. The government gave you the ground if you'd live on it and work it and prove you meant to stay. So we stayed. He broke the sod with a walking plow behind 2 mules, and the sod fought him the whole first year. It came up in long black ribbons that curled and would not lie down. The grass out here has roots that go deep as a man is tall. You do not tame that in a season. We buried a daughter that second spring, an infant, 3 days old, before we'd even settled on the whole of her name. There is one cottonwood on the place, down by the draw where the water stands in a wet year, and we laid her there. Jonah dug the little grave himself and would not let me watch. After that, the cottonwood was hers, and we never cut it, though we cut every other tree for stove wood in the hard winters. Some ground you don't disturb. We proved up on that quarter. The patent came, that's the paper the government signs when the land is finally yours, deeded out of the United States and into your own hand, and Jonah put it in a tobacco tin with the rest. He was a great one for keeping papers, receipts, notices, the little cards the land office mailed. "A man's word is good," he'd say, "but paper doesn't forget." He kept every scrap the government ever sent us, flat and dry in that tin, tied with a bootstring. The years went. We ran a few cattle and grew wheat when the wheat would grow. And in 1927, Jonah did a thing I thought was foolish at the time. There was a half section of range next to us, dry ground, good for nothing but grass and cattle, and the government had opened it to entry under a newer law. A stock-raising law, they called it. It let a man take up a bigger piece of the poor, dry country if he'd run stock on it. Jonah wanted it for the cattle, to carry them through the droughts on that extra grass. 500 and some acres of nothing but short grass and sky. "What do we want with more sand?" I said to him. "Grass," he said. "In a dry year, grass is money. And I want Wesley to have room." Wesley was a baby then. Our son had died young too, and his boy came to us, and we raised him as our own from the time he could walk. Jonah looked ahead the way I never learned to. He filed on the half section, and the land office took his entry, and he began the proving. That was the same as before. Live on it, use it, and after the years were up, go in and swear your final proof, and the patent would come. He entered it in 1927. The final proof would fall due in 1932. But Jonah did not live to 1932. The dusters came in the early 30s. You've heard of them, maybe, but hearing is not the same. The dust would stand up in the west like a wall the color of an old bruise, and roll, and the chickens would go to roost at noon, thinking it was night. It got in the house through the window cracks we'd stuffed with rags. It got in the milk. It got in Jonah's chest. He had a cough by then that would not turn loose of him, a dry, tearing cough, and each duster set it deeper. He died in the winter of 1931. The entry on the range was still proving up, still open, still, in the eyes of the law, not quite ours, the last paper not yet signed. I didn't think much of that at the time. Grief does not read fine print. I put him under the cottonwood beside our daughter, and I kept the place going with Wesley, who was 10 then and already better with a team than most grown men. So that is who we were, a widow of 50-some years, work-hardened, dry as the country, and a boy growing up straight and quiet beside me. We did not beg from anyone. We did not owe any man. That's what I believed right up until the paper on the gatepost. The trouble came in 1934, in the worst of the drought. The wheat burned brown in the boot and never headed. The cattle got thin. There was no cash money anywhere in the county, and none at our place either, and the tax fell behind. You have to understand how the tax was reckoned. There was a man named Dorsey Kell, the county assessor, and it was Kell who set down what your land was worth and what you owed on it. Kell was one of those men that a little power puffs up like bread. He wore a stiff collar in the dust and carried a leather book, and he lumped our whole holding together on one line of that book, the old home place quarter that was patented and ours free and clear, and the range half section that Jonah had only entered and never finished proving. Kell put them together as one farm and taxed the lot. I did not know enough then to see the mistake in that. I only knew the number at the bottom. $51.80, delinquent. In the year when I could not have raised $51 if you'd hung me for it. Kell came out himself to serve the delinquent notice. He could have mailed it. He could have handed it to me at the door like a Christian. Instead, he drove out to our gate on the very morning the school wagon passed, and he tacked the notice to the gatepost with 2 nails, right where every child riding into the Verlin school would read it going by. Delinquent, the Halstead place, in big print, so the whole road would know. I watched him from the porch. I walked down when he'd gone, and I took the notice off the post, drew the nails out with my fingers, and I folded it and put it in my apron. I said nothing. What was there to say to a gatepost? But I kept the notice. I'd learned that much from Jonah. You keep the paper. That was the first wound, and it was a small and private one, and I bore it small and private. The second came from Vane himself, before the sale, and there was a witness to it. Roland Vane drove out in a good car, a car with no dust on it, which out here is its own kind of insult. He was a landman. He bought up farms that had fallen behind on their taxes, all across 3 counties, and he bought them cheap and sold them dear. He had a company name behind him, printed on a card he gave me, Meridian Land and Loan. He wore the gray hat and a suit the color of ashes, and he had a way of signing his name too big, I'd learn later, as if the pen were a brand. He got out and looked over my fences and my thin cattle and my burned wheat, and he did it slow, letting me see him price it. My hired man, an older fellow named Alf, who'd worked for us on and off for years, was there at the barn and heard the whole of it. "Mrs. Halstead," Vane said, "I'll be plain with you. The county's going to sell this place for the back taxes. That's the law, and there's no help for it. Now, I can bid it in, and when I do, I'd rather not put a widow out in the road with nothing. So I'll give you moving money, enough to get you settled in town, clean, before the sale. You walk away with cash in your hand instead of a notice to quit." He looked out at the range, at all that dry grass running to the edge of the sky. "It's played out sand anyhow. You've broke your back on it long enough." Played out sand. That's what he called the ground Jonah broke, and the cottonwood, and the 2 small graves under it. I did not raise my voice. That has never been my way. I said, "It's ours, Mr. Vane, free and clear." Jonah kept all the government papers in an old tobacco tin. I never had cause to read past the front page, but they're there, every one. I said it plain, almost careless, the way you'd mention the weather. I did not know then that I had just told him the one thing that would save us. I did not know it myself. The tin was only Jonah's habit to me, a box of dead paper. I turned and went in the house, and Alf heard me say it. And Vane laughed a little through his nose and got back in his clean car and drove off. Remember the 10? I didn't. Not yet. Then came the Tuesday, the tax sale on the courthouse steps in Verland in October, with the wind up and the whole country the color of a paper bag. I did not have to go. A person can stay home and let it happen to them out of sight. But I am not built to look away from a thing, and besides, some stubborn part of me thought that if the county was going to sell my life, they could do it with me standing there watching. So I went. Wesley wanted to come, and I would not let him. 15 he was by then, and I did not want that picture in the boy's head. I went alone, in the truck, and I stood at the bottom of the steps. There were 40 of them at least. Neighbors, most of them. The Pruitts were there, and the Yosts, because their places were on the block too. Vane had run the same play on half the county. People I'd known 30 years. They didn't meet my eye, most of them. It's a shameful thing to watch, another person's ground sold. And shame makes people look at their boots. The auctioneer stood up on the steps and read off the description in that flat courthouse voice. All the thence north and thence west of it. The metes and bounds that turn a place you love into a paragraph. Then he called for the bid, which is only the delinquency, $51.80. And Roland Vane, standing there in his gray hat with his hands folded in front of him, said the number back like it was a small thing to say, $51.80. No one bid against him. Who had the money, and who would bid against Vane and take a widow's place out from under her in front of the whole town? So there was just the one bid, and the auctioneer looked around the way they do and asked twice and brought the gavel down. Sold. 60 years. For a song. That's the word they use for it. For a song. And I never understood it till I heard my whole life go for the price of a milk cow while the wind blew grit against my legs. Vane counted the money out into the clerk's hand, and I watched every coin, and I did not weep. And then he turned around to the crowd, because he was the kind of man who liked an audience, and he said it, the line I'll hear till I die. Sentiment doesn't pay the county, folks. The dirt doesn't know whose name is on it. And some of them laughed because they were afraid of him, and fear laughs when it's told to. Then Kell came down the steps with a fresh paper, the notice to quit. 21 days. He handed it to me with his stiff collar and his leather book under his arm, and he said, "You'll want to be out clean by the date on there, Mrs. Halstead. Save everyone trouble." As if I were the trouble. As if I were the one making a mess of a decent county. I took the paper. I did not say a word to either of them. I walked back to the truck through all those neighbors, and I drove home in the dust, and the whole way I did not cry, because I was too busy with a small, cold thought that had started up in the back of my mind and would not quiet. Free and clear, I'd told Vane. Jonah kept all the papers. But the range was not proved up. Jonah had died in the middle of the proving. I'd said free and clear, out of habit, out of love. But was it? That half section, had the patent ever come on it? Had the government ever really signed it over to us at all? I got home in the dark. Wesley had a lamp lit and supper going, and he took one look at my face and didn't ask. He's a good boy that way. He knows when to leave a thing be. We ate, or we sat over food, and then I got up and went to the bedroom and took down the tobacco tin from the high shelf where it had sat since we buried Jonah. 3 years of dust on the lid. I hadn't opened it because opening it was opening him. His handwriting, his careful little notes on the backs of things. But now I needed what was in it more than I needed to keep from crying. So I brought it to the kitchen table and set it under the lamp and untied the boot string. My eyes are not good anymore for close work by lamplight, so I gave the papers to Wesley and had him read them out to me, one at a time, slow. There was the patent on the old quarter, the home place. That one was clean and finished, signed and sealed, hours beyond any question. Good. There were tax receipts going back years, all paid, till this last cursed one. There were the hail claims and the mortgage that Jonah had cleared before he died. And then Wesley came to a stiff card, printed on one side, with Jonah's name filled in and a date. 1927. Read it careful, I told him. He read it careful. It was the receiver's receipt from the land office at Dodge City, the paper they gave Jonah when he made his entry on the range under the stock-raising law. And down toward the bottom, in the small printed type that nobody reads, was a line. Wesley read it twice because I made him. The title to the land remains in the United States until patent issues. Final proof pending. We sat there, the two of us, with the lamp hissing. I made him say what it meant, in his own words, because I wanted to be sure I wasn't fooling myself out of wanting it too much. It means, Wesley said slowly, the government still owns it. The range. Grandpa entered it, but he never finished. So it's still the government's ground, until the last paper comes. And it never came. Still the government's ground. Now think what that meant. Think what Kell had done, and Vane. You cannot tax land that belongs to the United States. The county has no more right to tax federal ground than it has to tax the moon. And if you cannot tax it, you surely cannot sell it for the taxes. Kell had lumped that range in with our home place and taxed the whole. Vane had bid on the whole and thought he'd bought the whole, and half of what they'd sold on those courthouse steps was land the county never owned in the first place, land the government still held. They'd sold what wasn't theirs to sell, because not one of them, not Kell who taxed it, not Vane who bought it, not the auctioneer who cried it, had read past the front page. The same thing I'd near done myself. But Jonah kept the paper, and the paper doesn't forget. I want to tell you I felt joy. I didn't, not that night. That night I only felt something hard settle in me, something that was going to have to be carried a long way and carried carefully. Because knowing a thing is not the same as proving it, and I had learned that very day exactly how much the law cared for a widow who merely knew she was right. So I did not go tearing into town the next morning to crow about it. That's what a fool would do, and it's likely what Vane would have expected. I sat with it, and the first thing I did was the thing Jonah would have done. I put it on paper. I gave them warning, fair and square, in writing, so that whatever came after, no man could say the Halsteads had hidden the truth up their sleeve. I sat down at that same kitchen table and I wrote 2 letters. My hand's not fancy, but it's clear. I wrote to Dorsey Kell, the assessor, and I told him plainly that the range half-section was under a pending homestead entry, that the title was still in the United States, that it was not taxable, and the county had no power to sell it, and that the sale of it was therefore void and clouded. I wrote near the same words to Roland Vane, care of his Meridian Land and Loan, and told him what he had truly bought, which was to say, on that tract, nothing. Then I did the careful thing. I drove into Verlin to the drugstore, to the marble counter, and I had the druggist and his clerk watch me while I made carbon copies of both letters. And I had them each put their initials and the date on my copies as witnesses that these were the true letters, and this was the day I sent them. Then I mailed the originals. I kept the carbons in the tin with Jonah's papers. You keep the paper. I want you to notice what I did there, because it matters to everything that comes after. I did not spring a trap. I warned them, both of them, in writing, witnessed. I told the county and I told the speculator exactly what was wrong and gave them the chance to set it right and walk away clean. They did not take it. Kell, I found out later, read my letter and threw it in the wastebasket. He told his clerk it was a crank letter from a woman about to lose her farm. That's all I was to him. And Vane laughed. He got my letter and he laughed, and he told the men down at the elevator. So it got back to me the way things do in a small county. The old woman sending me legal papers now. Papers from a dead man. Her husband's been under the ground 3 years, and he's still trying to farm through her. And he thought that was very fine, and the men who were afraid of him laughed again. Papers from a dead man. Yes, that's exactly what they were. And that dead man had read the fine print, which is more than the living one could say. Their laughing did me a kindness, though they didn't mean it to, because a warned man who laughs has no complaint coming. Whatever fell on Kell and Vane after, they had it handed to them first, in writing, on a plain sheet of paper, and they threw it away. That made what was coming clean. Remember that. It'll matter at the end. Now, I knew what I knew, but I am a wheat and cattle woman, not a lawyer, and I was not going to walk into a courthouse, the same courthouse that had just sold me on its steps, armed with nothing but a tobacco tin and my own opinion. I needed a man of law, and here the Lord, or luck, or Jonah's careful ghost, put one in reach. There was a young fellow just come back to Verland, name of Emmett Cade, a local boy who'd gone off to Topeka to read law and taken his examinations and come home to hang out his shingle in a county where nobody had 2 dimes to pay him. First real case of his life, and he hadn't had it yet. He was young enough that his collar didn't fit, and old enough to have the sense to listen. I drove in and I put the tin on his desk, and I had him read the range receipt, that one line, and I watched his face. He read it again. He sat back. "Mrs. Halstead," he said, "do you know what you've got here?" "I've a fair idea," I said, "but I'd rather hear it from a man with a diploma." So he told me, and he told it better than I could have, and he told me something more that I hadn't seen. First, he laid out what I already knew, that land under a pending entry is still United States title, and the county can't tax it and can't sell it, and so the tax sale of that tract passed nothing to Vane at all. He'd bought a piece of paper worth exactly the $51.80 he paid, and not one blade of grass. But then Cade leaned forward and gave me the second edge of it, the part that turned a defense into a victory. "The entry's still open," he said. "Your husband died proving up, but the law doesn't just close that door on a widow. You have the right, as Jonah's widow, to go in and complete his entry, to make the final proof yourself in his place and take out the patent. And here's the thing," he tapped the desk. "When that patent finally issues, in law it relates back to the date of the original entry, 1927. It's as though the title came to you clean, all the way back to the year Jonah filed, which means when it comes, it stands over everything the county did in between. It wipes their sale off the record like it never was. Not just voids it going forward, erases it back to the start. I sat there and I understood. It wasn't only that they couldn't take the range, it was that I could reach back and finish the thing Jonah started, and by finishing it, make the whole ugly business on the courthouse steps disappear as though it had never been cried. Relates back to 1927, to the year my husband, coughing already, walked out on that dry half-section and filed for grass, because he wanted his grandson to have room. I did not say much to Cade. I am not a woman who says much, but I asked him what I had to do, and he told me, and it was not a small thing. The land office that held Jonah's entry was the federal office at Dodge City, and to complete the proof as the widow, I would have to go there in person, with the tin, with proof of Jonah's death, and proof of our occupation and use of the range all these years, and make the final proof and file it and set the patent in motion. Dodge City is a good 2 days off by the roads we had then, and I would have to do it quiet. Because if Vane or Kell got wind that I was in Dodge City perfecting the entry, they might make some move to muddy it, file some paper of their own, gum the works long enough to matter. Better they went right on thinking me a beaten widow packing her wagon to quit. Let them laugh at the papers from a dead man. Let Vane come out and plow his played-out sand. While he did, I'd be 2 days west, finishing the one line of print that undid him. So I made up my mind on the ride home, with the dust coming up gold in the low sun, and the whole flat country going quiet the way it does at evening. 21 days they'd given me to quit. I wasn't going to spend them packing. I got home, and Wesley had the chores done and the lamp lit, and I sat him down, and I told him what Kate had said. All of it. The relating back, and the widow's right, and the 2 days to Dodge City. He listened the way he does, all the way through, before he spoke. "You're not going to quit the place," he said. It wasn't a question. There was something lifting in his voice that I hadn't heard since before the sale. "No," I said. "I'm going to Dodge City, and I'm going to finish what your grandfather started. And I need you to run this place and hold your tongue in town while I'm gone. Can you do that? Say nothing. Let them think what they think." "I can hold my tongue," he said. And then, quieter, "Read me the line again, the one on the receipt." So I got the tin down, and I found the card, and this time it was me that read it to him, holding it out at arm's length to my failing eyes, in the lamplight, in the same voice I'd have used for scripture. "The title to the land remains in the United States until patent issues." That's the whole of it, I told him. One line of small print, on a receipt an ignorant man would have thrown out with the trash. Your grandpa kept it 30 years without ever knowing he'd need it. And that man in the gray hat, and Dorsey Kell, and all their leather books and clean cars, not one of them read past the front page. I set the card back in the tin and tied the bootstring. "The loud ones sign the deeds, Wesley, but it's the quiet ones that keep the patent." He didn't fully understand it yet. He would. There'd be a kitchen full of neighbors before it was done, and a courtroom, and a man in a gray hat with his hat in his hands. But that was all still ahead of us. That night, I packed a valise, and I wrapped the tobacco tin in a clean flour sack and set it by the door, because it was going with me, and it was not leaving my sight from here on. And before I turned in, I stood a while on the porch and looked out toward the draw, toward the one cottonwood standing black against the last of the light, where Jonah lay and our daughter lay, on the ground he broke and never once believed anyone could take. 2 days to Dodge City. The notice to quit ticking down on the kitchen table. Vane already bragging at the elevator that the Halstead range was his to plow. I did not know yet how it would all come out, but I knew where I was going in the morning, and I knew the one line of print I was carrying there in a flour sack. And I knew that no one in Osgood County had the least idea that the beaten old widow, out packing her wagon, was about to reach back 7 years and pull the ground out from under every last one of them. I left before light. The road to Dodge City runs flat and pale and long. I drove it in the wagon with the flour sack on the seat beside me, the tin inside it, and Wesley up on the box handling the 2 mules. We slept one night under the wagon with our backs to the wind. I did not sleep much. I lay and listened to the mules shift and blow, and I thought about Jonah, and about the one line of print, and about all the miles between me and a clerk who had the power to make it true. We came into Dodge City in the middle of the second day. The federal land office was a plain brick building with a counter worn smooth by 50 years of hands. I set the tin on that counter and opened it in front of the man there, and I laid out the papers the way you'd lay out a hand of cards you already knew was good. My husband entered this half section in 1927, I told him, under the Stock Raising Act. He was proving up when he died. I am his widow, and I have come to finish it. The clerk was a young man with ink on his fingers. He read the receiver's receipt. He read the patent on the home place quarter. He read the entry card and checked it against his own book. And I watched his eyebrows go up, just a little, the way a man's do when the papers in front of him say more than he expected. "You've kept these well," he said. "My husband kept them," I said. "I only carried them the last 2 days." He gave me the forms. I filled what I could, and Wesley read me the rest, close by my ear, because my eyes are not what they were. I swore to the final proof. I named the improvements Jonah had made, the well he'd dug, the fence he'd strung, the 2 seasons of cattle he'd run before the dust came. I named the years. I signed my name, Cora Halstead, small and plain, the way I always sign it. The clerk stamped it and entered it in the book. He gave me certified copies to carry home. "It'll take some weeks for the patent to issue out of Washington," he said. "But the entry's perfected as of today, and it'll date back to the original filing." 1927, I said. 1927, he agreed. I thanked him. I did not tell him what it meant. I did not tell him there was a man in Osgood County with a board already up on my gate. I only tied the boot string on the tin and wrapped it back in the flour sack and carried it out to the wagon, and we started the long, flat road home. On the way back, Wesley said, "Grandma, why didn't you tell that man?" "Tell him what?" "That somebody stole it, that Mr. Vane's out plowing it right now." I watched the mule's ears for a while before I answered. "Because it's not stealing yet," I said. "It's a mistake. And a mistake you can let a man make all the way to the bottom of it, if you keep your mouth shut and your papers in order." I shifted the flour sack under my hand. "Your grandpa taught me that. You don't stop a man who's wrong. You let him finish." When we came home, the board was up on the gate. Meridian Land and Loan Company, painted white on black, the letters big and square. And out on the range, on the half section that had been federal ground since 1927, and would be federal ground until the paper caught up, Roland Vane had a man breaking sod with a tractor, turning under Jonah's grass, getting it ready for a wheat crop that would belong, on the record, to a dead man's widow. I stood at the gate and looked at that board a long minute. Then I went in and started supper. The weeks after that were the hardest kind of quiet. Vane took possession the way a man takes something he's sure of. He hung the board. He plowed. He came out twice to look at the work and never once looked at the house. Down at the elevator, he told anyone who'd listen that the Halstead range was the best cheap dirt in 3 counties, that he'd bought 60 years of somebody's sweat for the price of a milk cow, and hadn't sentiment made a fool of the old woman who'd let it go. I heard about it the way you hear about everything in a county like ours. Alf carried it home from the elevator. He told it to me at the barn, with his hat in his hand, ashamed to be the one saying it. He says you sold cheap because you couldn't read the assessment, Ms. Halstead. Did he? I said. I didn't like to tell you. You did right to tell me. I forked hay for the mules and did not look up. Let him talk, Alf. A man that's talking isn't reading. Because someone, somewhere, was going to start reading. And I knew who it would be before it happened. Vane meant to flip the ground. He wasn't a farmer, whatever board he hung. He was assembling cheap acreage to sell on to a wheat syndicate out of the east. Men with money who wanted big flat sections and clean title. And a syndicate like that brings a lawyer, and a lawyer runs the chain of title back through every deed and tax sale to make sure the ground he's buying is really the ground being sold. That lawyer came to Osgood County in the fall. He went to Ott Bledsoe's office, to the Register of Deeds, and asked for the abstract on the Halstead tract. Now Ott Bledsoe was an old man with spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and 50-some years of the county's plats in his head. Ott had already pulled the 1927 entry card. He'd found it on his own, the way an old clerk finds things, by feeling a wrong note in the record and worrying it. He'd said nothing to me, and nothing to anyone. He only laid it in his drawer and waited. So when the syndicate's lawyer ran the chain, he came to a place where it didn't run clean. The home place quarter had a patent. The range half section did not. There was an entry and a proof pending, and then a county tax sale sitting on top of it, like a roof built over an open well. The lawyer frowned at it. Ott told me later he frowned a long time. Then, driving back out the section road, that same lawyer passed me walking in from the mailbox. He slowed his car and rolled the window down. "You're the widow Halstead?" "I am." He was a soft-handed man in a good coat. He looked at me the way that kind looks at my kind. He saw a bent old woman in a faded dress with dust in the creases of her hands, and he made up his mind about me the way they all did. "There's a small irregularity in the record on that range piece," he said. "Nothing that need trouble you. Did your late husband ever mention the title on it? Any papers he kept?" And here's the truth of it. I could have ended it right there. I could have told him the whole of it and watched his face fall. But I thought of Jonah saying, "You let a man finish," and I put on the face they'd all decided I had. "Papers?" I said, and I let my voice go thin and tired. "Mister, I never could make head or tail of my husband's papers. It's all the county's business now, anyhow. They took it fair and square, they told me. $51.80. I let my mouth pull down. I only wish they'd have let me keep the garden. He looked at me another second. Then something in him decided I was nothing, which is what they always decided. And he told me good day and rolled the window up and drove on. He let it lie. He wrote the gap off as an old clerical mess that would clear itself, the kind of thing that never troubles a big deal. And he told Vane the syndicate could go ahead once the paperwork was tidied. I stood in the road and watched his dust go. Then I walked on in and put the mail on the table and did not let myself smile until the door was shut. That was the closest it came to falling apart, and it held, because a soft-handed man could not imagine that the thing he was hunting was folded in a tobacco tin on a widow's mantle, and the widow, standing right in front of him, knew every word of it by heart. Now the paper began to move in earnest. Emmett Cade, my young lawyer, the one just back from Topeka with a shingle so new the paint hadn't cured, He built the thing careful as a man building a fence to last. He filed to quiet title on the range. He gathered the certified copies from Dodge City. He had Ott's entry card. He had the receiver's receipt from 1927 with its one line of print. And when the patent came through from Washington, he had that too, issued in my name, dated back to the day Jonah first filed. And while Emmett built it, the kitchen filled up, the way I'd told Wesley it would. The Pruitts came first. Del Pruitt and his wife, in from their place east of us, that Vane had bought the same way, on the same steps, for their own back taxes. Then the Yosts. It turned out Vane had done to them exactly what he'd done to me. Their farms had unpatented ground in them too, stock-raising entries their fathers had started and never quite finished, lumped in with the taxable land by the same careless hand, and sold off in the same sale. They sat at my kitchen table, and I taught them the one line. I had Wesley bring the tin down, and I opened it in front of them, and I put my finger on the print. "Read it out, Wesley." And Wesley read, in the same steady voice he'd read it to me by lamplight the first night. "The title to the land remains in the United States until patent issues." "That's the whole of it," I told them. "The county can't tax what the government still holds. It can't sell what it doesn't own. Dorsey Kell put your range on the same sheet as your wheat ground because he never once checked which was which. And Roland Vane bought the deed and never asked to see the patent, because in all his life he never met a paper he couldn't shout down." I closed the lid. "You finish your entries, same as I finished ours. And every sale sitting on top of that federal ground comes off the record like a picture off a nail." Del Pruitt turned his hat in his hands a while. Then he said, "You've known this all along, since the sale." "Since the night of the sale." "And you let him plow it." "I let him plant it, Del," I said. "I've a mind to let him harvest it too, and then take the whole crop with the ground." That was the one time I let myself be hard about it, and I was sorry after, because it isn't Christian to relish a thing like that. But I was tired, and I was old, and I had carried it a long way in a flour sack, and I let myself have that one line. They laughed, all of them, low and careful, the laugh of people who have been beaten and are only just now letting themselves believe they might not stay beaten. The whole county, understand, still pitied me. That was the strange sweetness of those weeks. In town, they shook their heads over the poor Halstead widow who'd lost her place for want of $51. At church, they brought me pie, and I said thank you, and I let them. Because a woman who has already won can afford to be pitied a little while longer. Then the day of the hearing came. They held it in the county courthouse in Verland, the same building whose front steps Vane had bought my life off of in October. The room was long and high, with tall windows and a rail across the front and the judge's bench up on its platform. And when I came in that morning, the square outside was full of trucks. I have never seen anything like it, before or since. The Pruitts had come, and the Yosts, and every family for miles that Vane had touched or nearly touched. 30 trucks, 40, nose in around the square like cattle at a tank. Men in their good hats, women in their church dresses. They filled the benches, and they lined the walls, and they stood out in the hall, and the whole room smelled of wool and dust and coffee. Roland Vane came in late, the way important men do. He wore the clean gray hat. He had his own lawyer with him, and the syndicate's soft-handed man besides. And Dorsey Kell came in behind them, with his leather assessment books under his arm. And the three of them took the front table, like men who had come to sign a paper and be gone by noon. I sat behind Emmett Cade, with the tin in my lap. Emmett stood up when the judge called it, and I will say this for the boy. His voice did not shake. He laid it out plain. He said the county had sold, in October, a described tract that included the range half-section. He said the county had taxed that half-section as private land, and then he walked to the bench and he laid 3 papers up before the judge, one at a time, and named each one as he set it down. The homestead entry, Your Honor, filed by Jonah Halstead in 1927 under the Stock Raising Act. He set down the second. The Land Office receiver's receipt for that entry, of the same year, and I draw the court's eye to the line printed at the foot of it. He set down the third. And the patent, Your Honor, issued this fall out of the General Land Office to Cora Halstead, widow, upon her completion of that same entry, dating, by operation of law, back to the original filing in 1927. The room had gone quiet. You could hear the tall windows tick in the sun. Emmett turned so the whole room could hear him, not just the bench. The title to that half-section, he said, was in the United States government from 1927 until this patent issued. Every day of that time, including the Tuesday in October when Osgood County put it up on its own front steps and sold it for $51.80. He let that number sit in the air a second. You cannot tax land the government owns. You cannot sell what you do not hold. The county sold air. The tax deed conveyed nothing. And this patent, relating back to 27, stands over all of it, clean and first and final. I was watching Vane's face. I had waited a long while to watch it. He did not understand at first. He looked at his own lawyer for the joke of it, the way a man looks around a room for someone to share his certainty. But his lawyer wasn't looking back at him. His lawyer was looking at the 3 papers on the bench, and the color was going out of his face, because a lawyer knows in his stomach when a thing is true before he's finished reading it. And the soft-handed syndicate man beside him had already begun, very quietly, to gather his own coat. Then Vane understood. I watched it reach him. I watched the moment the clean gray hat stopped meaning what it had meant on the courthouse steps. He came half up out of his chair. Your Honor, I bought that ground. I've got the deed. I've got it recorded. I've plowed 160 acres of it. You've got a deed, Mr. Vane, the judge said. He was an old man, too, and he said it without any heat at all. The question before this court is whether the county had anything to convey by it. Mr. Cade, is there dispute that this patent has issued? None, Your Honor. It's certified from Washington. Mr. Bledsoe has recorded it. Ott Bledsoe, standing along the wall with his spectacles pushed up, gave one small nod. The judge looked down at Vane over his glasses. Then I'm afraid, sir, that what you plowed was the government's grass, and now it's this lady's wheat. And the syndicate man stood all the way up and buttoned his coat and walked out of that courtroom without one word to Vane, down the aisle between all those benches of watching neighbors and out the door. His deal was contingent on clear title. There was no clear title. He did not come back. Vane's whole reason for buying my ground walked out the door in a good coat and left him sitting there with a board on somebody else's gate. Vane's own lawyer tried. He got up and talked about the recorded deed and the presumption of regularity and the reliance of a good faith purchaser, all the long words, and the judge let him finish out of courtesy and then set it aside like a plate he was done with. A purchaser is charged with the state of the title, counsel. Your client bought a tax deed on federal land. There's no good faith that cures that. There's only the reading he didn't do. That was when Dorsey Kell made his mistake. Kell could not sit still and be nothing. He stood up with his leather books and his voice pitched high, and he said the assessment was valid, that the tract had been on the county rolls for years, that the sale followed the statute to the letter. The judge let him wind down. Then he said, mild as milk, Mr. Kell, you tax this half-section as private property. Show me the patent under which private title was held on the day you assessed it. Kell opened his mouth. Point me to it in your book, the judge said. The patent, the one you taxed against. And Dorsey Kell, county assessor, keeper of the leather books, stood in front of 40 of his neighbors and could not do it. Because there was no patent to point to. There had never been one, not until I made one, and mine dated back before his sale and swallowed it whole. He turned some pages. He turned them again. His face went from red to a bad gray, and in the end he closed the book and sat down, and the whole room heard the sound it made when it shut. That was the wound. What came after was the reckoning, and the court took it one man at a time, and I was glad of that, because each of them had earned his own turn. The judge ruled from the bench. He voided the tax sale of the Halstead tract. He ordered the deed to Roland Vane struck from the record of Osgood County as a conveyance of land the county never owned. He confirmed the patent in my name, relating back to 1927, as good and first title against all the world. Then he asked if the party held any right to be heard before the order was entered. I stood up. I hadn't meant to say anything. Emmett had told me I needn't. But I stood up with a tin in my two hands, and I looked across at Roland Vane, who was on his feet now with the clean gray hat down in his hands, turning it by the brim the way Del Pruitt had turned his at my kitchen table. "You said a thing to me on those steps, Mr. Vane, in front of 40 people, I said. You said the dirt doesn't know whose name is on it. I let it sit. You were right about that. The dirt doesn't know, but the government does, and the government kept the ground. I looked at the papers on the bench. You bought a deed, sir. That's all you ever bought. A piece of paper the county had no business selling. My husband bought the ground itself back in 1927, one line of print at a time, and he kept the receipt in a tobacco tin for 30 years without ever knowing he'd need it to bury the likes of you." I sat down. My knees were shaking, but my voice hadn't, and that was what I'd wanted. The court took up Kell next, on the record, plainly. It faulted the county's assessment of federal land as improper on its face, and it ordered the rolls corrected. It didn't jail him. It didn't need to. He gathered his leather books off the table in front of every soul in Osgood County, and he carried them out past the benches of the people whose farms he'd sold off other men's fine print, and not one of them said a word to him. Sometimes that's worse than words. He knew the way home would be long, and then it spread, the way I'd promised the Pruitts it would, because that soft-handed syndicate lawyer had used one careless abstract as his pattern, and Vane's own man had followed it. Every tract Vane had bought the same way came apart the same way. The Pruitt sale fell. The Yost sale fell. One at a time, over that fall and winter, the hearings went the same road as mine, because you cannot tax what the government holds, and once one family stood up and proved it, the rest had only to walk the same path with their own tins and their own receipts. 30 trucks had lined the square for my hearing. More came for the Pruitts. The whole county learned the one line of print that winter. Farmers who'd never read past the front page of anything now saying, "Relates back," and "Still in the United States," over coffee at the elevator like they'd known it all their lives. Roland Vane's holdings were spread over 3 counties, and he had built every acre of it on deeds he'd read and patents he hadn't. It unwound tract by tract. The wheat syndicate, once burned, would not touch a single parcel with his name on it. And Meridian Land and Loan, the company he fronted, the men back east who put up his money, when they saw their western portfolio coming apart in the county courts of Kansas, they withdrew his backing altogether. The board came down off my gate in November. I heard it came down off a good many gates that winter. He came out to see me one last time. I'd known he would. There's always a day the loud man has to come to the quiet one's door and ask. It was cold when he came, a gray day with the wind laying the dry grass flat. I saw the clean car turn in at the gate with no board on it now, and I put on my shawl and went out and stood on the step. I did not ask him in. He got out slow. He looked older than he had in October. He had papers in his hand. "Mrs. Halstead," he said. "Mr. Vane, I'll come straight to it. I need your signature." He held the papers up. "A quitclaim. Meridian's settling my accounts, and they want every disputed parcel released clean. yours among them. It's your ground, no argument. I only need you to sign that I've no further claim, so I can close it out and be done." I looked at the papers, then I looked at him. "You need me to sign," I said. "I do." I stood a while and let the wind blow. I have thought about that minute many times since. I could have shut the door in his face and made him pay a lawyer to force it through, and he'd have deserved every dollar of it. But I am not a young woman, and I did not want to carry him in my chest any longer than I had to. So I named my price, plain. "I'll sign," I said, "on 2 conditions, and you'll meet them both, or you'll come back with a court order and wait a year for it." "Name them." "First, the $51.80 you paid for my family on those steps, you'll pay it again. The same figure, to the penny, into the Osgood County School Fund. The one whose children read your delinquent notice off my gatepost. You'll pay it in your own name, so it's on the record what it was for." His jaw worked, but he nodded. "Second, you'll sign the range back to me, in the deed, with your own hand, big as you sign everything. I want your signature on the paper that gives it back, as plain as it was on the paper that took it." He signed. I gave him a pen off the shelf inside the door, and he stood on my step in the cold and signed the range back to me. And his signature was big, the way it always was, sprawling across the line like a man who has never once in his life imagined he could be wrong. When he'd done it, he handed me the pen back, and he looked at me, and I think he wanted me to gloat. I think it would have been easier for him if I'd been cruel. Then he could have gone home and called me a bitter old woman and slept. I didn't give him that. I only took the deed and folded it once and said one thing in the same dry voice I use for everything. "Sentiment doesn't pay the county, Mr. Vane." I put the folded deed inside my shawl, but the fine print does. He got in his car and drove out my gate for the last time. I stood on the step until his dust was gone, off toward the county road, and then I went in where it was warm, and I put the deed in the tobacco tin with all the rest, and I tied the bootstring, and I set the tin up on the mantel where it has stayed ever since. That was near a year ago now. It's spring again as I tell you this. There's wheat on the range half-section, green and even, coming up out of the ground Roland Vane broke thinking it was his, on land that has been ours since 1927, and will be Wesley's when I'm gone. I stood at the fence this morning and looked at it a long while. Jonah would have liked to see it. He never saw a wheat crop on that piece. He died in the winter of 1931, with the entry still proving up, and it took his widow 3 more years and a 2-day drive to Dodge City to finish the thing he started. But it's finished. It's his crop, coming up green, whatever name the patent carries. The tin is on the mantel. Beside it, in a frame Wesley made from barn boards, is the patent itself, the government's own paper with my name on it and the year 1927, reaching up through all of it like a taproot. And next to that is the one photograph I have of Jonah, taken the year we married, a young man squinting into the sun in front of a sod wall, not knowing yet what he'd break or what he'd keep. Wesley is 16 now, and taller than me by a head. This morning he was out on the range on a tractor, our tractor, paid for, with money from the first crop, no lien and no loan and no company's board on the gate. He drove it in a straight line the way his grandpa taught him to break sod, and he waved to me at the fence, and I waved back, and I thought my heart would come out of my chest. The others made out different, the ones who thought I was nothing. Roland Vane is 2 counties over now, they tell me. He sells insurance. A man who once bought 60 years of a family for the price of a milk cow, going door to door selling policies to farmers, and I am told he does not mention Osgood County if he can help it. Dorsey Kell was not returned to office. The county found a younger man to keep the books, one who is said to check, now, which tracts the government still holds before he taxes them. Kell keeps a little store in town. People buy from him. They are civil. But nobody has forgotten the sound that leather book made when it shut. And Meridian Land and Loan pulled out of the county altogether. The whole three-county scheme come apart on deeds read and patents not. And I don't believe there's a farmer in western Kansas who'll sign a paper now without reading it down to the last line of small print at the foot. That's the whole of it. That's how the beaten old widow reached back 7 years and pulled the ground out from under every last one of them. With nothing but a tobacco tin and a line of print an ignorant man would have thrown out with the trash. I told Wesley, that first night by the lamp, that the loud ones sign the deeds, but it's the quiet ones that keep the patent. He understands it now. He's seen it. And I'll leave you with it too, whoever you are, out wherever you're listening, because it's the truest thing I know after 56 years on this earth, and one Tuesday in October that near took it all. Keep your papers, read past the front page, and when a man in a clean hat tells you the dirt doesn't know whose name is on it, you let him finish. Tell me the name of the town you're watching from. I'd dearly like to know how far the Halstead place has traveled.